Right, good evening and welcome. I am honored to be with you today to participate in a tribute to my former mentor and partner, Betsy Plevan. And I want to recognize Betsy's family who are here. Her husband, Ken. Where are you, Ken? There you are. Okay. And her son, Rabbi Bill Plevan, and his wife, Sarah, and grandson, Ariel, not here tonight. Okay. Understood late. I also want to thank the New York City Bar Association and all the staff who were so helpful in setting up today's tribute, especially Martha Harris. I want to call out Martha and Paul, but the whole staff here. So thank you. I'm sure most of you read Betsy's obituary in the New York Times, which detailed her time at Proskauer, where she worked from 1974 until her death, as well as her many professional and personal accomplishments. Today, however, we'll take time to hear from those who knew her well, to talk about her groundbreaking legal career and legacy. And I want to first introduce our panelists today. To start, we have U.S. District Judge Loretta Prescott, former Chief Judge of the Southern District of New York from 2009 to 2016. She'll talk about Betsy's service to the Mother Court. Judge Prescott is, of course, a legend herself, a graduate of Fordham Law School, go Fordham, who practiced at the law firms of Cahill, Gordon, and Rindell, and Herzog, Calamari, and Gleason before being appointed to the bench in 1992 by President George H.W. Bush. Debbie Raskin, one of the most highly regarded plaintiff's side labor and employment lawyers in New York, a partner emerita at Vladeck, Raskin and Clark, PC, and a former president of this great organization, the New York City Bar Association, will talk about Betsy's contribution to the field of employment law and focus on civility in litigation. Debbie was a frequent adversary of Betsy's, but as she will tell you, she was also a friend for 30 years. My friend and former partner at Proskauer, Keisha-Ann Gray, will discuss Betsy's legacy as a trial strategist and mentor. Keisha-Ann, who I can say from personal knowledge is a superb trial attorney, was recently named in Hollywood Reporter as a power lawyer in recognition of her work investigating misconduct complaints from major industry clients. Prior to joining Proskauer, Keisha-Ann served as a AUSA in the Eastern District of New York, and before that, she worked at Hughes, Hubbard & Reed. She serves on the board of the Attorney Grievance Committee for the New York Appellate Division, First Department, and co-chairs the Federal Bar Council's Employment Litigation Committee. Larry Johnson, currently a permanent observer of the International Anti-Corruption Academy to the UN. He's also served in, among other impressive roles, as Assistant Secretary General for Legal Affairs at the UN, a legal advisor to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, and as Chief de Cabinet, Office of the President of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague. He will discuss Betsy's contributions to the City Bar Council on International Affairs. Next, but not least, last but not least, Sheila Boston, current president of the New York City Bar Association and a partner at Arnold and Porter, who besides being a great lawyer and person, has been a passionate advocate of diversity and inclusion, and she's won several prestigious awards for her leadership in this area. She'll discuss Betsy's contributions to the New York City Bar Association, including her establishment of the Office of Diversity. Sheila will also discuss Betsy's legacy of service to bar associations and the profession. Now, before we go into our dialogue, Proskauer was kind enough to lend us a clip of a beautiful video that they put together on Betsy. And Paul, if I can ask you to just roll the clip.
Betsy made her mark at Proskauer. She was the first woman in Proskauer's litigation department and ultimately the first woman to serve on Proskauer's executive committee. Oh, and the first woman to hit a grand slam at a Proskauer baseball game. Her extraordinary successes as a litigator has made her a go-to national expert for insights into some of the largest sexual and gender discrimination cases of our time. Betsy has turned client advocacy into an art form.
She's always represented us very well. And, she has that unique quality from a client's point of view of really getting it. So as you explain a case, she understands very rapidly, really more rapidly than most others.
Everybody I know trusts her, senior executives where I work. If I say this is a serious matter and I'm bringing in Betsy Plevan, they know, number one, that it's really a serious matter. I'm not kidding. And they know that we're bringing in the best.
Setting the pace, taking the lead, that's Betsy. And as we reflect on her achievements, it's her unique personal qualities that continue to impress and inspire us.
All right, to kick things off, I'm going to start with Judge Prescott. Could you please tell us how Betsy served the courts and comment on her legacy in this regard?
Absolutely. Aside from being a superb litigator, as we've heard, and a trailblazing woman, Betsy Plevan was a great friend of the Mother Court. She served for some 12 years as chair of the merit selection panel of the Southern District of New York, which, as you know, that panel recommends candidates for magistrate judge at Foley Square. Lest you think that is a quick and easy job, let me dissuade you immediately. Over those 12 years, the panel usually received around 60 packages, but sometimes there were as many as 100. And of course, they'd have to review all of the resumes, the writing samples, and all of this mass of paper. Then, of course, the panel members did independent research. They called lawyers, adversaries of the candidate, called judges before whom the candidate had appeared, and did quite a lot of independent work. Then, of course, they had to discuss the candidates and eventually interview some number of candidates. Imagine all of the time that went into this. Eventually, then, of course, the panel recommended a slate of candidates to the Board of Judges. And during Betsy's tenure, I can say to you that the panel invariably sent to the court a slate of talented, qualified candidates of the highest integrity. I think there were about 10 or 11 magistrate judges over whose vetting process Betsy presided. Now, aside from Betsy's regular employment with the Mother Court as chairman of the Merit Selection Panel, she also shared her wisdom and expertise in employment law with the court. During the time I was Chief Judge Swain, I thought there was an issue and maybe a little problem where our senior unit executives might use a little brushing up on discrimination law. So I asked Betsy if she would talk to them. She immediately and enthusiastically agreed to do so and came down and spent several hours on a refresher course in employment law, talking to our unit executives. In my view, because of Betsy's personal efforts, our court's anti-discrimination policies were strengthened and our unit executives made to be better executives. The Mother Court is grateful for Betsy's long service, and I will miss her dearly as a friend can. She will be sorely missed by all. We thank Betsy for her service.
Keisha-Ann, thank you, Judge Prescott. Keisha-Ann, you and I both served on trial teams with Betsy. Though you more than me, you came to Proskauer with significant trial experience. But at the same time, I think you'd say you learned some things from Betsy. So can you share some of the things that you learned from Betsy about trial practice and strategy?
Sure. Can you hear me? Good, you can hear me. I came with experience in actually trying cases, but I did not have the experience of the business of trying cases. And I learned from Betsy the business of trying cases. She was an absolute tactician. She was a general in the best sense of the word. From the U.S. Attorney's Office, we kind of do everything. Everyone does everything at the same time just to get things done. And so I actually came without the knowledge of the importance of compartmentalizing expertise on a trial team. And I learned that from Betsy. I tried 4 cases with Betsy. I had the honor of working with her and learning from her in these 4 cases. And I saw how she could pull out the best of everyone on the team and ensure that those who had a specific knack for what was needed for that particular trial, and every trial was different, but who had a knack for whatever was needed in that particular trial, had the ability to shine and to focus on that knack. And so while, yes, people will say from the U.S. Attorney's Office, you came with a significant amount of trial experience, that meant really nothing, and it will mean nothing if you can't really put it together as a full team and ensure that those who have specific abilities to do certain things are able to do those things. I mean, Betsy was the perfect general when it came to that, as well as a mentor in encouraging us, even when we were at times unclear or unsure about whether we should take this risk in making this argument in front of this court. She gave us, knowing that she gave us a nod, gave us the strength to really spread our wings and become the attorneys that we hope to be. And so I am forever indebted to Betsy for her selflessness in guiding me in that way.
Do you have a favorite trial memory, Keisha-Ann?
I have some, but some I can't share in open company. Tell you the truth. But I think it was the first trial that I did with Betsy, the Adele Samarco matter. And the plaintiff was obviously lying on the stand. And here's why she was lying. I'm going to tell you why she was lying. She was an anchor. And she claimed that she had reported out the Tupac Shakur verdict before the verdict actually was reported in the court. So we were like, how is that possible? That she got behind into the jury room to get this information to report it out first. So that was just something she was throwing in, not necessary to throw in, but trying to bolster herself up as how important she was. But we knew that could not possibly happen. So I remember when she actually said this, we're in front of Judge Moskoff. And she said this, and Betsy looked up and she was like, you did what? And she replied, she's like, you reported out the verdict before the verdict actually was read in open court. Is that what you're saying? And she was like, yes. And Betsy looked at the judge. She looked at the marshal, like someone has to take this woman away right now. It's just so funny. And then the other funny thing about that was she wasn't necessarily familiar with Tupac Shakur, so she was like Tupac Shakur. So that was just funny. But I mean, the reason why I tell those 2 stories because even though trial can be so serious and so intense, and Betsy can be so serious and so intense, she was able to still find humor and bring humor to the experience, which is very, very important, especially when you're junior lawyer coming up and already nervous about trial. To have someone who is literally a legend be able to kind of come down to your level and laugh and find fun in the exercise was critically important and important to everyone who's worked with her.
Well, I think she really did have fun on the trials, because the last one that we worked on, she was in the office till 2 a.m. And I know because I shared rides home with her, and she was very happy to be staying that late. She loved trial work, and her passion influenced the whole team. But she was very passionate about that work. Thank you, Keisha-Ann. Larry, many of our audience members may not be aware of Betsy's keen interest in international law and issues. And I know Betsy was an avid traveler. She used to tell me she'd be a travel agent in another life. And she was integral to the expansion of Proskauer's labor and employment practice to Paris and to London, where the firm handled substantial matters. So if you could tell us about her contributions and legacy with the Council on International Affairs.
Great, thank you very much. Actually, I have two examples of Betsy's work and influence in the international affairs or the international activities of this bar association. One was when she was president, and from 2004 to 2006, when there was the idea to have a mission to a country which until 4 weeks ago, probably none of you had heard of, Moldova. Because even at the time, there was a Russian separatist movement, it's still there, called Transnistria. And there was an initiative from the Committee on European Affairs to send a city bar mission there to meet with the protagonists. And so they met with the Russian ambassador, the Moldovan ambassador, and she was extremely supportive. Even though this was not in her usual lane, the unfairness and the risk of it all was clear. And she was a great support, terrific supporter of that mission. She had I was told, a dinner for 200 here at the Bar Association for the president of Moldova. So that's one example where, as president, she put her weight on the scale of let's do this and let's speak up for fairness and ethics and for the rule of law. The second example was when she was chair of the Council on International Affairs, and we had before us a litigator who an NGO litigator who was defending, or not defending, but trying to make a claim on behalf of Haitian cholera victims. It's not the sort of thing that maybe many of you know about, but in Haiti, UN peacekeepers from Nepal were stationed there. They didn't know it, but they were carrying cholera. And because of faulty latrines in the UN peacekeeping camp, the human waste went into the rivers of Haiti, and 8,000 to 10,000 people died because of it. For a while, the UN said, well, this could be cholera from Dominican Republic or somewhere in the, no. WHO, this was Himalaya cholera. So the victims tried to sue the UN or make a claim to the UN. And the UN, seeing lots of money involved, said, no, this is not a claim of a private law character, because the law is, if it's a claim of a private law character, the UN has to provide some settlement procedure. This is not diplomatic immunity. I would have thought faulty latrines is pretty much a good classic third-party liability issue. The UN, no, and the US government agreed with the UN. And this was one of her issues, because this was the Obama administration. This was Susan Rice. This was the White House of Samantha Power, who said, no, make it go away, because we'll never get money out of the Republican Congress. So Betsy and the committee, having heard this, said, no, this is not right. Something's wrong here. So we have to investigate, and we will do a report, and we will push this. So it's truth to power. So she signed reports and letters to the Secretary of State that told him, the American government, needs to instruct the UN to follow their obligation and provide some sort of settlement procedure. This is not a peacekeeping issue, the construction of latrines. This is standard classical. So it's a good mix of American law and international law, in fact. And she relished that. But she stood up for justice, for accountability. And even though in the end, the US government supported the claim of immunity, and to this day, the Haitian cholerists do not have justice. But there was a great case of Betsy, who saw it through the prism, of course, being an American lawyer, but this was not right. And you can use American skills to make the case, and she did. So we will indeed miss her. She was a great defender of rule of law and accountability and justice.
Thank you, Larry. Sheila, Betsy was a mentor to many young lawyers, particularly women lawyers. When I was a baby lawyer, she taught me the ropes. She also provided an example of how to balance work and personal obligations. She taught me that each lawyer needs to strike the balance that works for them. Betsy was passionate about promoting women lawyers, including through leading a committee on women in the legal profession. Probably most of you in the room know that it resulted in a landmark study, Glass Ceilings and Open Doors, Women's Advancement in the Legal Profession. That was back in 1995. But she also was passionate about promoting diversity in the profession more broadly. And she established, as I mentioned earlier, the Office of Diversity here at the City Bar. So I'd like to hear from you on what you see as her legacy and also her legacy of service to the Bar Association.
Okay, do I have a few minutes?
You do.
Woo, because Betsy, wow. In the mid-1990s, following a glass ceiling study by the Women in the Profession Committee of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York, the Fordham Law Review asked the first chair of that committee to contribute a personal reflection on the topic. The author began with a formative reminiscence of growing up as a girl in the 1950s when overt sex discrimination was embedded in our culture. And she wrote, quote, "Many girls my age were perhaps not even conscious of this discrimination because, unlike me, they were not the least bit interested in sports. I was, however, the proverbial tomboy, and during my grade school years spent many afternoons playing baseball, i.e. hardball, not softball, with boys in my class. My recollection is that I was better than many of them. Nevertheless, and despite my father's lobbying efforts, I was never allowed to play on a little league team," end of quote. Nor in the early 60s would Betsy be allowed to play on her high school's tennis team, despite the support of the coach. And that was because it was against league rules. Once a pioneer, always a pioneer. And kudos to her dad and that coach for trying. And what a fascinating glimpse into our cultural history and those early efforts to chip away at gender discrimination. Betsy Plevan's life was a bridge across generations and across eras. Just as she and other girls scattered here and there sowed the seeds for Title IX by introducing new ideas like girls can play sports too, who would think? Betsy would, throughout her career, be a driver of critical advancements for women in the legal profession and beyond. A 1991 report by that same committee, this report was on sexual harassment in the lawyer's workplace, included the recommendation of a robust complaint procedure with options beyond the chain of command. So many ideas that frankly seem like no-brainers today were once new ideas, cultivated by wonderful people such as Betsy. Betsy was amazing. She held leadership positions at the Legal Aid Society, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, Volunteers of Legal Service, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. She was the first woman president of the Federal Bar Council and played a key role in that organization's development, including in forging its unique relationship with the federal judiciary. In fact, shortly before her passing, I looked and I saw, at the time I had the privilege of serving with her on the Federal Bar Council's nominations committee. I actually had an email from her in September of 2021. I'll tell you about that later. But to add to Betsy's extensive work on the executive committee and several other city bar committees, and let me underscore several, it came as no surprise to those following her career that she would become just the second female president in this association's 133-year history. Taking office in 2004 as the 61st president, Betsy oversaw the work of updating the city bars and the Justice Center's public identity for optimal communications in the information age. Moving to the more streamlined name, New York City Bar Association. See, I'm trying to follow her lead, right? I've been calling it the Bar of Hope. So anyway, she also simplified the logo. And I understand from reliable sources that she became borderline obsessed with promotional merchandise, donning and showing off her logoed bathrobe in the office, y'all, in the office. So she definitely had a fun side. Betsy was a fierce advocate for equity. She testified before the New York State Assembly opposing the death penalty. And among her priorities as president of this association were pro bono and diversity. During her tenure, as has been said, The City Bar's Office for Diversity and Inclusion was established to support firms signing on to the City Bar's Statement of Diversity Principles, to measure firms' success through diversity benchmarking reports, to produce training sessions for firms on diversity issues, and to engage and inspire the legal community to open its doors more widely. While diversity initiatives had been run by volunteers exclusively up to that point, Betsy strongly advocated and was involved in the hiring of a full-time staffer for the office. I want you all to hear this. Most bar associations, they have a committee called the Diversity Committee. A lot of associations have a director of diversity. Betsy established paid staff for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And can we just clap for her on that? That is just amazing to me. It's a big deal. That's diversity. Then there's pro bono. Betsy announced the launch of the City Bar's Statement of Pro Bono Principles with its initial 30 signatories. Firms adhering to the principles would, among other things, pledge a certain number of hours to pro bono work, count pro bono hours the same way as billable hours, and look favorably on pro bono work when making personnel decisions. And with her enthusiastic support, the City Bar Justice Center raised $500,000 at its inaugural gala and launched its consumer bankruptcy project to help those with limited economic means recover from unexpected life events like divorce and illness. And then, only 1 year into her presidency at the City Bar, when Hurricane Katrina landed, what did Betsy do? She rolled up her sleeves. She would later recall how the City Bar was able to jump in and help based on its experience in providing pro bono legal services for victims and survivors of 9/11, convening the legal community to offer space to displaced lawyers, help children apply late for school, and displaced families get housing, medical care, and social services. She wrote, and I quote, "To me, the City Bar's response to Katrina was a classic example of how an organization can provide leadership for many who want to help, but just don't know how to go about doing it on their own," end of quote. Like all City Bar presidents, and don't I know this, Betsy was very much at mercy of current events. Current events, I know about this. It was the revelation of an extraordinary development that led to her third main priority. So we talked about diversity, we talked about pro bono. The third was civil rights in times of terrorism. On the very first day of her presidency, she got a call from then Executive Director Barbara Opatowski. She's in the house. Yes, let's give it up for Barbara. She also received a call from the one and only then a General Counsel Alan Rothstein. I think I saw him in the house as well. Yes, there he is. All right, legends, these are legends. The chair of the International Law Committee, Scott Horton, had received in an anonymous package some classified government documents, including a memorandum from the White House counsel to various government officials on the permissible use of torture, often referred to subsequently as the torture memo. And Betsy recalled, quote, "As cautious lawyers, we decided to determine first whether we could read and disclose the material, and quickly obtained favorable advice from the chairs of appropriate committees of the association," end of quote. Well, the memo was declassified a few months later, and as Betsy would later write, the rest, of course, is history. And of course, the life and career of Bettina B. Plevan is an inextricable part of the history of the New York City Bar Association and of the legal profession as we know today. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, as we can see, Betsy's legacy is broad and deep in so many different areas. I was reminded just of one personal story when you were speaking, Sheila. When I first met Betsy, she was a big advocate for women's rights, and we were just chatting, and I said, my mom always told me I could lean back on my typing skills. So she made me take typing. And Betsy said, well, that's the reason I didn't take typing. I refused to take typing. And so she was teaching me, even though she was, from a different generation where a lot of women did take typing classes and became secretaries. She told her mother, and she said to me, I'm never going to be a secretary. And it was pretty inspiring. But I was reminded of that story when you were talking. I'm wondering, Judge Prescott, do you have any favorite memories of Betsy?
When she reported out the magistrate judge slates that the merit selection panel was recommending to the Board of Judges, she always had a wonderful reason. I mean, people might say, well, why is that one on the selection panel? Everything was on the up and up. Everyone was qualified. Everyone was of great integrity. And I could tell by the way she held herself, she felt it was part of her personal integrity to bring the Board of Judges the very best candidates. And she always did it with a smile.
I know that was important role for her. Debbie, I'm wondering, as an adversary, as we're having all of these conversations, sharing these memories, were there any lessons you learned from Betsy?
I'm going to talk about some of her cases, but let me start with one lesson she taught, which was the importance of food in litigation. And there are two vignettes that illustrate this. One, about 20 million years ago, at last count, she and I had a trial against each other, and the jury was out, the courtroom was empty. I went out to use the phone booth. Remember phone booths? Yeah, okay. And then when I came back, she and her trial team had a pizza. And I'm thinking, where did this come from? How did she get a pizza in here? And then about 10 minutes later, the jury came back in her favor. I needed the pizza. The second food story with Betsy is that we had one of our many lengthy negotiations. This one went to about 2 a.m, and we were pretty much at each other's throats. We hadn't eaten. We were super crabby. Turned out that someone on her trial team was observant, and so the food we got had to be kosher. Somehow at 2 a.m, Betsy found kosher corned beef sandwiches about this thick, which we proceeded to eat and then go into a cholesterol coma that let us settle the case within the next half hour. Can I talk about some cases now?
Sure.
I mean, you hear all of this and you wonder, my God, when did she ever have time to practice law? Well, we were on the other side, so I'm telling you she did. And I've been her loyal opposition for more than 30 years. And I will tell you that she has shaped the field of employment law, and she set a standard for all of us to try to meet, even those of us on the employee side like me. In preparing to discuss Betsy's work as an employment lawyer, I went through court dockets and other records of her cases. And it was interesting to me to see how many times Betsy was brought in to sort of rescue the case after initial counsel had maybe not done such a great job. And that's not easy, fixing somebody else's mistakes. Perhaps the most famous instance where she did this was in the Supreme Court case of Meritor Savings versus Vincent. And that was the first time that the Supreme Court held that sexual harassment could constitute sex discrimination in violation of the equal employment laws. The case went back to the judge who had held the opposite way and was probably none too happy to have been reversed in such a visible and well-known proceeding. And when it came time to give the case back to a lawyer to handle it for the bank, they could have picked anyone, but they picked Betsy to save their bacon, so to speak. And she conducted discovery and managed, as we say in the trade, to resolve the matter, despite the high profile and despite the difficult position that the previous proceedings had left her in. Another case where Betsy was brought in at the last minute to save the day was Thorzen versus Penthouse International. Now, as the name might suggest, this was a sexual harassment case against a group that weren't exactly choir boys. The trial judge had awarded $600,000 for emotional distress and $4 million in punitive damages under the New York State human rights law, and the appellate court affirmed. Betsy took the matter to the New York State Court of Appeals, where she presented a detailed legislative history of the state human rights law. And in 1992, the court unanimously agreed that Betsy was right and that punitive damages were not available under the state law, much to my chagrin. But Betsy didn't represent just banks and questionable publications. All kinds of organizations sought her advice: hospitals, real estate organizations, media groups, and more frequently, law firms. With increasing frequency, these institutions wanted Betsy to conduct neutral investigations. And Betsy had the integrity and the flexibility to take off her employer side hat and give the client what might be the cold hard truth of whether they were in deep trouble and had a significant legal problem on their hands. The list of Betsy's cases also made clear that she didn't just dive in for the rescue. Litigation is a long game, and nobody played it better than Betsy. One striking example of that is Betsy's work in defending a class action alleging pay and promotion discrimination against a nationwide insurance brokerage organization. That case lasted 7 years and had at least 11 published decisions. Those decisions included Betsy's whittling down the case to just one region, limiting which job titles could be included, and cutting what time period could be applicable for the class. Like other class actions, this involved sophisticated statistical analysis and expert witnesses. And it was that kind of painstaking bit by bit and motion work that let Betsy whittle the case down to make resolution possible. I also want to mention one other trial matter that I consider just one of Betsy's many successes. Unlike many litigators, and you've heard some of this already, Betsy really did take cases to trial. And when Betsy said, and you couldn't reach a deal, we'll just try it, you knew she wasn't kidding, and you knew you better be ready. Betsy defended Columbia University in a claim of sex discrimination and retaliation by a junior faculty member at the business school. The complaint sought $20 million in damages and alleged 18 causes of action against Columbia and against the plaintiff's supervisor. In not such short order, Betsy's motion practice got rid of 11 of the 18 claims. What followed was a 15-day trial. After 2 days of deliberations, the jury found that there had been no discrimination, but that the plaintiff's supervisor had retaliated against her and awarded $750,000 against Columbia and the plaintiff's supervisor. Motion practice followed, and the judge found that amount was unjustified and cut it to $500,000. That is 1/40 of the amount that the plaintiff had claimed. Not for sure a bad result. These are just a few cases skimming the surface of the many published decisions and other litigations that Betsy made a record with. But I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about what's referred to, mostly by judges, I think, as civility, which is the concept that litigators will fight. We're going to mix some metaphors here. Litigators will fight like cats and dogs and then play well together in the sandbox. That's not an easy combination, but one that Betsy mastered. What did this mean in practice? First, it meant being absolutely honest. When she said there were no more documents on a certain topic, you knew that was right. You knew there was nothing else there to be produced. Second, it meant no sharp practice, no pushing the other side's lawyer against the wall just for the sake of doing it. Betsy had been the recipient of that. For example, one of the published decisions, she had to go to court because an adversary wouldn't give her a 4-day extension around the Thanksgiving holiday. And she wasn't about to do that to the other side. And finally, civility means, and Betsy personified, respecting the humanity of the other side, finding common ground. Whether it was gossiping about bar association activities or chit chat about vacations, it was building bridges, efforts that I'm sure benefited Betsy's clients, but also benefited all of us in this often trying profession of ours, and we're grateful for it.
You know, your remarks remind me of a lesson I learned from Betsy just in mediation and settlement, and this recognition of the humanity in all people. And I remember a particular case where we were talking about the strategy, and one of the most important things that she wanted to recognize was the pain that the individual plaintiff was feeling, and to acknowledge that as something that was real, and to try to and I think that her recognition of that helped to resolve that case, and she really strategized about how to recognize that, if that was possible. In, you know, if she could disagree with somebody's legal position, but still recognize that somebody may be hurting. Judge Prescott.
Deborah brings to mind one of the other venues in which Betsy encouraged people to work and play well together. And of course, that was at the Federal Bar Council. She always engendered good spirits and civility. I mean, Deborah, she was even seen having one of those little drinks with the umbrella with a plaintiff's lawyer, for Pete's sake. But I think, especially during her tenure as president, but every time she and Ken attended, there was always much frivolity and joviality going on. And that helped with the relations between the bench and the bar and among all of us lawyers.
Yeah, she struck me as a people person who brings people together, and she did that through her association work as well, encouraging
With
young
or without,
lawyers.
with or without the drinks with the umbrellas, Ken.
Yes. Keisha-Ann, if you had one word to describe Betsy, what would it be and why?
You know, one word doesn't do justice. I was thinking about this as I was coming in, and I think it's 3 words. For me, Betsy was a force of nature. She really was a force of nature. She was complex, but then she was very simple as just being able to communicate and connect. And when I think of her representation of who she was at the top of her career, and I've said this before, she was at the top of her career, at the top of the profession, and still was able to be fully present, at least what I saw, because our offices were next to each other and we'd keep our doors open often. And what I saw and heard about how she would be present for a family member, her grandson usually, who would call, no matter who was in the office, no matter what was being discussed, no matter who was on the phone, no matter which judge, no matter which adversary, no matter which client, when he called and her secretary came in and said, your grandson, excuse me, I have to take this. And so for me, you know, I'm a mom of twin 7-year-olds that I had by myself by choice, okay? And I struggle a lot of times, especially in this profession, to think about how can I really rise to the top and still be fully present for my family. And for a long time, I thought I couldn't do it. Betsy never necessarily talked to me about it. She just showed me how to do it. She just mentored me by her example. And so that's why I can't think of one word to describe. It just doesn't do justice. She really was a force of nature. And for people like me who are not used to seeing people like me represented at the highest levels at the top of many professions, seeing her there encourages me that more is to come and we can do it. And so that's why I can't put her in a box as one word personally.
So true, so true. Larry, what would you say would be Betsy's most lasting legacy in terms of the international committee?
Well, many of the attributes that have been described, particularly in her litigation and in her professional career, were at in display, full display, when she was president and chairman of this Committee of International Affairs. So she brought all of these attributes of character, civility, whether she's dealing with the death penalty in India, or whether she's dealing with writing a letter to China for women's rights defenders, or whether she's writing a letter to Pakistan on blasphemy laws. So in the end, I would pick sort of three words, as it were, that I think she, as one, put them all together with a hyphen, right? Does that work? But anyway, that she brought to bear on her International Affairs Council chairmanship, and I think as president as well, is one, genuine. She had no agendas. What you see was what you got. And that can be unusual in this town and among lawyers, frankly speaking. Okay, genuine. She was truthful, linked to that, and she was principled. And that she brought to bear in her leadership positions, whether it was domestic law, international law, labor law, litigation, what have you.
So true. Sheila, can you share a favorite memory of Betsy?
I have a few, you know, a few words is hard. Let's see. First, I just want to say Betsy was very generous with her time. If I wanted to speak with her, I'd email her first, propose some times, and she'd always be quick to respond and oblige. So for example, in the late fall of 2019, she was one of 3 past presidents of the city bar with whom I spoke before accepting my nomination to serve. And I'll never forget the conversation. So I told her what was going on, told her it's confidential, you can't tell anybody. She said, you know how she said that, right? Yeah, you'd be terrific at it. You should certainly do it. That's what she said. Then she proceeded to tell me how wonderful it would be and regaled me with a story or two. She noted it would be a great platform for me, given my passion and advocacy for pro bono service and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She also shared with me how much she enjoyed engaging in partnerships with international bar associations and how it had allowed her to travel to London, Paris, and elsewhere, none of which I got to do. Let me just point that out. And my last email from Betsy was actually on September 15th, 2021. I went and looked back at it. It was a little over a month before her passing. And it was addressed to me and Brett, actually. And she was talking about how delighted she was that I was going to attend virtually the World City Bar Leaders Conference in her stead. And needless to say, I was just so very much encouraged by Betsy and her confidence in me to take on the role as City Bar President. It meant a lot. Another fond memory is we were at a federal bar council meeting. Yeah, the drinks with the little umbrellas, Judge Prescott. And a panel on which I was working with others was in jeopardy because one of our speakers at the very last minute bailed out. I can't remember why. And somehow I let my fellow program coordinators talk me into replacing that person. And that program included a mock oral argument. And on the other side, playing opposing counsel was none other than Neil Katyal. Of all people, Mr. Supreme Court extraordinaire, right? So I don't think that I thought everything through carefully when I accepted this, but I vividly remember Betsy, in addition to Steve Edwards, by the way, being my advocate and cheerleader. Because before the program even took place, she was telling many of the conference attendees about what had happened and how I was, coming in at the very last minute. And it was like, it was a beautiful thing because in a way I feel like, it inured to my benefit that then people weren't expecting too much because I was preparing at the last minute, et cetera. But anyway, it went very well. Thank God, went very well. And after it was over, she proceeded to remind everybody again how I had just jumped in at the very last minute and I had done a great job. And it was just, it meant so much to me. It was just so wonderful. Talk about a major confidence booster. And I appreciated her for that. Last one, Betsy made spaces in places, I'd like to say. She was a promoter of inclusion. And I can remember times when I was in meetings of the Second Circuit Court's 125th anniversary committee. Mike Cardoso, you were there as well. I was the youngest in years and the most junior in practice, in the practice of law, sitting at the table with these really prominent practitioners and these prominent federal judges. And Betsy, she'd always make a point of it sometime or another to mention my name, offer me to do a particular project on which we were working. And, she just always asked for my opinion during those meetings, making sure that I was engaged and that I really felt like an integral part of the group and that I knew that my input was valued. And why? Because I was Betsy Plevan. And can I just say one other thing? So she was a promoter, especially of women. Keisha-Ann, I just got to tell you something real quickly. Oh my God. She was a fan. She was a great mentor to you. And I know this because anytime I was in a bar association meeting with Betsy, if it was an office of that association that was available, or we needed a speaker on certain topics, I need you to know this, Betsy would not hesitate to call out your name and shower you with accolades. And I remember, thinking on several occasions, my God, how blessed Keisha-Ann is to have such a fierce mentor, female mentor, because it's tough. Black females in this profession. But Betsy had your back, and I need you to know that. She was so proud of you. I didn't have to call you girlfriend. I didn't have to call you or look at your bio because Betsy would tell us what you were up to and shower you with accolades. So I just thought you ought to know that.
Thank you for telling me.
That's so beautiful, what you just said, Sheila. And those of us who grew up at Proskauer with Betsy, as I did, know that she was tough. She was a tough boss. She demanded a lot, but she never demanded more than she demanded of herself. And everybody knew that. She put in 300%. And as tough as she was everybody's advocate. She advocated for people. She promoted people. She introduced people to bar associations, to roles. And even when you didn't know that she was pushing for you, she was pushing for you. So she was a practicer of tough love in a way to the lawyers that she mentored. And we are better for it. We are better for it.
My word, by the way, was advocate. Every time I just kept coming back to that, whether it's on a personal level, professional level, advocate.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's really beautiful. I don't know if anybody else wanted to have any final remarks about Betsy. So we're coming to the end of the hour, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank Debbie Raskin and Maya Goodell, who's a member of the City Bar Civil Rights Committee. Where are you, Maya? You're here? There you are. Thank you. For their assistance in planning today's celebration of Betsy. And I want to thank Proskauer for hosting the reception following this. So I hope everybody can join in the reception and we can share more about Betsy as we mingle over drinks, maybe with an umbrella or not.
That was my question.
And as is clear, we could talk about Betsy for much longer. Her zeal for the law and dedication to the profession is an example for all of us. I know I will never forget all of the support and mentorship that she gave me, not the least of which was supporting my interest in becoming a federal magistrate judge. May her memory be a blessing.